The actual story is people crossing a stretch of deadly sea in unfit boats who can't swim, who've never driven a boat before, with life jackets that don't pass muster often. And we've got tens of thousands of them across safe. We've rescued them. And I think it's wonderful.
You've been standing on the front line of Dover, listening to voices that actually rarely get heard. These are people who are helping on what you called one of the great search and rescue operations of all time.
Charities can't say anything. Volunteers often can't say anything. Nobody can say anything because everyone's so frightened of this tiny constituency, which is the right, who are ludicrously amplified by certain newspapers and websites and the government. I've done some pretty far out journeys, and yet nothing I have done touches what those people had done that morning. Imagine doing that with a baby and then getting here and being told that you're some kind of problem. I interviewed a man and I asked him what it meant to him to be Welsh. And then he says, well, it's got nothing to do with genes or family history or where you're from. He says it is in the heart. And it is a love of the place in the heart that makes Welshness. And that is a profoundly political position, which threatens pretty well the entire world order. And it is the one I most fundamentally believe in. Nationality identity is in the heart, and it's founded in love. And the worry for the people like Neil is that these people coming across the channel are coming for the money rather than for the love. But the difference between me and Neil is that I've interviewed them, and they are coming for the love.
I live a nomadic lifestyle, and I'm never in one place for too long. So from time to time, I find it very convenient to order groceries in the form of a Gusto box. I've been using Gusto for nearly 5 years now. It's a delivery company that sends you fresh food and all the ingredients you need to cook delicious meals at home, along with very easy to follow recipe cards. They have over 90 recipes every week, so there really is something for everyone. And so many of their recipes I've returned to again and again because their meals are just delicious. I've got a referral code. I've shared it with so many of my friends. It means they get cheap groceries on their first few boxes and I get credit in return. I'll link it below. Use it to sign up and you get a pretty hefty discount off your first box. There's no subscription required and you can order just one box whenever you want. I should start by saying, first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you very much.
This is the first time anyone has been on the podcast on their actual birthday.
Hey.
Congratulations.
Cheers, mate.
And thank you for sharing a bit of your special day with me on this
There's
recording.
nowhere I'd rather be. Certainly not in London.
You are also, perhaps, I think now this podcast is 2 years old. It's called Great British Adventures, but I think you are the first Welsh voice I've had on this podcast.
Bloody hell, bud.
It's been a long time coming. There have been other people who have said yes, but I've just not been able to facilitate it. But you yourself grew up in Wales and you call yourself Welsh, even though you were born in England.
I identify as Welsh.
You identify as Welsh, okay.
And am called it, actually. I was made a Welsh author by the Welsh Literary Establishment without me saying so. Yeah, I was born in Hammersmith and near here. But I grew up on the M4 really. So weeks in London in a flat in Holland Park, £7 a week, very nice, 99-year lease, lost it in the divorce, and in Wales. And from about 6 onwards, home was Wales. So I am Welsh, yes. Although my brother, who had exactly the same childhood, identifies as something called Borders. I mean, he went to school near Shrewsbury at one point, I think. Yeah.
You have a very unique perspective of having lived in 2 different countries that are kind of part of the same union in a sense.
4. I lived in France, Italy, England and Wales.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in terms of the British segment, you kind of can identify within different boundaries.
Yeah, London Welsh. London. Or Welsh London, really. But I live in Yorkshire, where I'm more alien than I am anywhere else in the world. When they see me coming and then they hear this voice and this stupid name and this stupid haircut, they treat me as they treat any other alien really well. Actually, West Yorkshire, Hebden Bridge, is a very kind and friendly place. It's a refuge for all sorts of people. I'm not there seeking refuge. I'm there because my family are there. My son and my dear ex and his my ex's side of the family, Aubrey's grandparents and things. So he lives there, she lives there, I live there. And luckily for me, my wife lives there too.
Well, if I take you back to Wales, I bring this up purely because this summer I have been on my own adventure exploring the coast of Wales by bike.
Beautiful coast in the world, no?
I can 100% attest to that.
What's your favourite bit?
It's hard to really actually say one particular bit. There's obviously sections, and there were beaches that I had very unique experiences on. Sometimes that was perhaps where I arrived mentally or emotionally at that time. But I think the overriding conclusion is that no matter what part of the coast you find along Wales, you'll always find something for you in that place.
Yes. I mean, my second favourite place is probably Aberdaron, you know. That's wondrous out there. The veils are very thin between this world and all the others. Time doesn't mean a thing. I love Criccieth. My mum watched the Free French driving amphibious tanks out of the sea in Criccieth during the war, practising for D-Day. Robert Graves wrote a poem about the things that came out of the sea at Criccieth, which is a banger. And we've just been there on our holes, which we do a lot, and I love it. But my favourite place in the world is in southwest Wales.
Pembrokeshire coast?
It is on the Pembrokeshire coast, yes.
Yeah. That was certainly a stretch which was of concentrated highlights.
Martin's Haven, the Skomer boat there. So I was looking up recently, you're like this, Tom. If you were a Russian submariner and you had to land somebody on the coast of Wales, where would you land? So you look at the height of the smallest Russian submarine, it's about 25 feet, 30 feet. So you need 40 feet of water at low tide. And there's one place which is just off. So you could go in following the ferries into Milford Haven, but that would, you wouldn't do that unless you were actually going to attack Milford Haven. Whereas if you just wanted to land somebody quietly, you can pull up about 100 metres off Martin's Haven and swim ashore. And the thing is, I did see a submarine once at Wattick when I was a child, and it made a lasting impression on me. Yeah, but St Martin's Haven and Skomer and the Deer Park are the most beautiful places I've ever been.
And you mentioned Aberdaron. I arrived there after having quite a complicated, complex, emotional day on and off the bike. And during my journey, I was never actually sure where I was going to finish. It was always something I kind of discovered maybe later on in the day. As it got to about 5 or 6 o'clock-ish, I'd be looking to see what campsites were
now
nearby.
You're travel writing.
And on this particular day, also it's important to highlight that that spit of land, that headland that comes out of Wales, is quite a forgotten...
The Llyn. Yes, it's the centrepiece of Welsh culture and identity. And although it's overridden around the edges by massive Audis from Birmingham and Manchester, in its heart, it's a miracle. It's old Wales, still alive and well, as if modernity never happened. It's completely wonderful.
I definitely got a sense of that. And I was very curious about that part of the land because I knew very little about it, because it gets overshadowed by Snowdonia, by Anglesey, by Cardigan Bay,
exactly.
All these more prominent kind of touristic places.
Have effectively defended it, yes. The Romans obviously sent a legion up there and then crossed to Anglesey, but they didn't seem to have, you imagine what happened after they put Anglesey to the fire and sword. Whoever was still alive, and there weren't many of them, obviously took refuge in the Llyn or Snowdonia. But it's something utter. I mean, Jan Morris lived there, of course, and her son Tom still does. And she could have lived anywhere on earth. And she made the right call. Yeah.
The one thing I loved about the Welsh culture is how much pride they have in being Welsh.
Interesting you should say that. So I've been doing a lot of research into the right wing, and I've spent quite a lot of time the last 2 weeks in quite frightening right-wing pubs. And what somebody said to me there, a lovely man called Neil, who looked like he'd just come off the field from Agincourt, he said, "Small boats, we hate the fucking French more than we hate them." And what it boiled down to was they don't care really what colour people are or what they believe or anything. They don't give a shit. What they care about is that this amazing world that we're in now in West London, all of British society was built on the labour and the fighting qualities of the working class. And in order, for that to work, that love of what British values really are, it was key. So their question is, how dare people who live in houses like this despise them and diss them for loving English flags and English values? And I completely, as a Welshman, understand that.
It is in the news a lot recently about British and specifically the St George's flag being prominently displayed across the UK. I saw how much the Welsh flag was prominent over the entire coast of Wales.
Well, it is the best flag in the world because it has a dragon on it.
It is. But I imagine, and I can't attest to this too much, but because I haven't spent much time there recently, but I imagine in Scotland it's also very prominent.
They're having a bit of a Saltaire moment. And there was a Saltaire moment in response to the St George's moment. See, I think flags are completely ludicrous beyond the level of a rugby field. After that, it's all nonsense and bollocks, really. And there's a wonderful moment on Penllyn where I interviewed a man called Twm Elias, who looks like Welsh Merlin. And I asked him what Welshness meant, what it meant to him to be Welsh. And it's on Radio 4, it's a programme called Into the West. And he says, well, that's a question. And then he says, well, it's got nothing to do with genes or family history or where you're from. He says it is in the heart, and it is a love of the place in the heart that makes Welshness. And that is a profoundly political position, which threatens pretty well the entire world order, and it is the one I most fundamentally believe in. Identity is in the heart, and it's founded in love. And the worry for the people like Neil is that these people coming across the channel are coming for the money rather than for the love. But the difference between me and Neil is that I've interviewed them, and they are coming for the love.
Well, let's talk about this. You're not just an author, for a start. You are a broadcaster, a journalist, a traveller. I would also say adventurer.
Oh, thanks, mate. Well, coming from you, that makes me one.
Someone who's, because you're never afraid to place yourself right at the edge of a story, whether that is charting life on container ships for months at a time, or walking across Europe.
We had a Mercedes, to be honest. We didn't do Berks Walk. We did sections of it at quite high speed in comfort. But anyway, I know. Of course, I've been incredibly lucky with travel, and I am addicted to it. And you said the edge of the story, and you're right. And of course, as a travel writer, the kind that I am, you basically turn up not knowing anything, and you declare your ignorance, and they fill you in, and you write it down, print. But what I want to do, so I'm launching a newspaper today, Baby Wolf, and what's so good about it, it is young people writing not from the edge in, which is what the London media do, and what the world media do. They're writing from the middle out.
So
as a reporter, so I was trained by the Daily Mirror, Trinity editorial training in Newcastle on the Newcastle Journal, and they said, Horatio, come in. That was the fire brigade in my patch of Newcastle. And we were taught basically that the tabloid law is law in journalism, and it is get in there, which means go right to the middle of it and talk to the people who are actually doing it and watch them doing it. Turn them over, which is a bad one, where you pretend to be their mate and then stitch them up, and then have it both ways, where you then stitch them up backwards once they go. So the Dangerous Dogs Act is a very famous example where British journalism terrorised the major government into rushing through some very bad legislation very quickly because they reported every dog tack in a week, and there's a lot of them every week, obviously, but if you report them, it looks worse than it is. So, and then they immediately, the day after legislation came out, ran these pictures of these terrifiedly cute bulldogs praying in the backs of garages as the government loomed over them. And that's having it both ways. And obviously that's not the kind of journalism I practice, but it's useful to know how it works. And the point, I suppose, is that I have been very lucky, and I have been shown a lot of beautiful surfaces of this world, but occasionally, I hope with the books, I'm able to go beyond the edge.
And your point about the different type of journalism that your writers...
Yes, so that's fundamental, is that you have to get to the middle of the story. And that's why journalism is such fun, because we know all the gossip that we can't print. And that, how the world works is of enduring fascination and miracle, and obviously finality, etc. So yes, it's It's a really valuable job, and it's something that Britain does really well because the English language and because of the British people's hunger for news, which is we read more newspapers per head of population than anybody. The Brits, because we're so good at writing them. And obviously we're notorious for our appalling behaviour and everything, but, the Daily Mail doesn't often lose in court because it's mostly right, factually. And I work for them. They are, you don't get a fucking wrong fact past them any more than you do past the FT. Obviously, they do also play games that the FT don't play. So I'm very keen on encouraging young people into journalism. And I mean, why wouldn't you? We can really make a global contribution as a nation by providing unbiased, accurate, telling, vivid, entertaining, and thought-provoking journalism.
Just jumping in briefly to say, if you've got this far, you're probably a fan of the show. And it would be great if you wouldn't mind confirming that love by following or subscribing to this podcast. It takes just one click from you, but it really does make a huge difference in getting more people to find this show. Thank you. Well, your latest book, you've been standing on the front line of Dover, listening to voices that actually rarely get heard. These are people who are volunteers, who are helping on what you called one of the great search and rescue operations of all time. It's a rather unrecognised and uncelebrated part of the story that we hear in the news. It is
the actual story. And you're right. The actual story is people crossing a stretch of deadly sea in unfit boats who can't swim, who've never driven a boat before, with life jackets that don't pass muster often, in terrible conditions, actually being eaten by that particularly nasty combination of petrol and seawater, which causes chemical burns. And we've got tens of thousands of them, 160,000 of them across safe. We've rescued them. And I think it's wonderful. But no one else had written it that way. Because the RNLI aren't that able to. They can't say anything. Spokespeople can't say anything. Charities can't say anything. Volunteers often can't say anything. Nobody can say anything because everyone's so frightened of this tiny constituency, which is the right, who are ludicrously amplified by certain newspapers and websites and the government. So, yeah, I've told a straight story accurately.
What initially drew you to wanting to speak directly to the people?
I was miserable and poor. It was winter. I was, borderline clinically depressed, and I was obsessed with the small boat crossings. It was in about 2021, I think. And so I thought I'll go down and just walk along the cliffs and see what country they've come to. A bit like you, how we... The lovely thing about our job is you arrive in places knowing nothing and everything is true and new. It is as you see it. Whereas if you know a place, it's much harder to see it truly. So I was going to try and do that. And then I got to Dover and I just ran into Border Force on the slipway, who gave me a world exclusive, which was the story that everyone was telling was wrong. They weren't going to strike. They were looking forward to doing pushbacks. They weren't members of the union and nobody had been to talk to them. So that's how it started.
Yeah, and explain what you mean by pushbacks. For those who don't know.
What you'd need really is a really souped up jet ski, which they have. And you go out into the mid-channel before, ideally, around the English border. And as a dinghy comes over, you just rest the nose of your jet ski against it and push it back over the line. The disadvantage...
This is the line that exists in the middle of the channel?
Yes. Yeah. French territorial water and English territorial water, we basically split it down the middle. The problem with that, as any seafarer knows, is that you're liable to sink the boat. And in the channel, the cold is such that your muscles go very quickly. So even if you're wearing a life jacket and you're fit, after a few minutes, you will really definitely need help to come out, And if you think of 60 people in the water, the jet ski can take one plus the driver, maybe two. That's a bad look. So Border Force and their union quite rightly didn't want to have anything to do with it. They said they'd be had up for murder, which they would have been under international maritime law But obviously the government didn't feel that way.
This came from the government. This was top down.
Yes. This was Priti Patel's idea. She was going to do pushbacks. And so Border Force were filmed practicing them. And of course, they're not that difficult, except safely. They're impossible. And so the union was just not going to have it. But this team were really up for it. They weren't members of the union. They were waiting to get the go. And like so many of Priti Patel's policies, it never saw the light of day. But it was a great story for me. And then I started talking to people in Dover, and suddenly everything I thought I knew turned upside down. I did it for the FT and it went around the world. It was extremely satisfying. One of my proudest moments in journalism, honestly. And then I went to Calais and asked the same questions, the ones that we think we know the answers to, like, why do you want to come? And then, again, nothing that I'd been told by the Mail or the Guardian or the BBC. They want to come because they really admire British values. That's the actual reason. And when you drill down through that, it's freedom. They feel, and when I say they, I mean people from across 9/10 of the world, say they feel and believe they will feel more free here than anywhere. And the bloody frightening thing is they're probably right. You know, right now, today, 5th of September 2025, Farage has been talking about how Britain is like North Korea. On this morning's Today programme, Nick Robinson shredded Richard Tice, the money guy in Reform, shredded him. It was embarrassing on what British values actually are and who we should be compared with. The extreme right in America are calling Keir Starmer a sort of Kim Jong figure. This is the whole thing. And we all know, if we give it a second's thought, that actually, never mind Graham Linehan's tweet, you're free to say here what you can stand up, what is true, and what doesn't incite violence against people. And that's all we have to defend, you know? And we'll win this. The right have no arguments beyond lowering their own taxes. They have no vision. I'm talking about Nigel Farage specifically. He has no vision of what he would do with power. He has no higher ambition than self-gratification. He doesn't even know why he's doing it. He's like Iago or Johnson. They're propelled to the top because it's a terrifying power that they wield. And they will either implode and take us all down with them, or we will, politically speaking, cut them to fish food and feed them to themselves.
Dover is one of the constituencies that elected a Reform member to the Houses of Parliament. Speaking to the public amongst Dover, what did you personally learn as a?
They were really busy. They were getting really well paid. Everybody had jobs. There hasn't been so much activity down there since the fishing industry died. It's been a huge boom for Dover. I mean, you can't get a hotel room in the Premier Inn. They're booked out. It's a really...
And they're booked out by who?
G4S, outsourcing firms, Mighty. These are employees working directly with the refugees, the private medical companies, private security companies, private transport companies. Then there's all the border force, etc. They have people from all over the nation down there. It's a real boom town. And when you ask them what they think of the people in the small boats, they say, well, we'd do the same, wouldn't we? The most telling and accurate quote to sum it up was, you can't have everyone coming over, but we'd do the same, wouldn't we? And then he said, my daughter works for them, G4S looks after them. And a lot of them are there to look after these people, as well as, you know, that kind of job being the kind of job that you can get, which is a big deal in our depressed towns. And he said, you know, when they tell her they want to kill themselves, that really upsets her. But what we're doing as a nation, actually, is helping an awful lot of people out. You know, we have done magnificently well. I know the stuff that gets into the press is only the bad stuff about the asylum backlog, but I've met these people in that backlog, and a lot of them are just really glad to be here. And they want to give us all the talent they have.
Why? Why are they glad to be in this asylum backlog?
Because they are fed, sheltered. They have a relationship with the Home Office. Their claims are being processed. If they have a claim to asylum that's strong, they will get it. They can then start work. They then belong to one in their estimation, one of the best countries in the world, and they have their whole futures and their great-grandchildren's futures ahead of them. Who wouldn't be delighted with that?
your choice of phrase here on the people that you've spoken with is to call them asylum seekers. And commonly they're called migrants. They could be used in different names. What do you personally believe is the vast majority of people who are coming over here?
It doesn't matter. I mean, the stats tell you about between 60 to high 70% of everybody in each of those dinghies will be granted refugee status. So the correct phrase for them is not asylum seekers or migrants, it is refugees. It is a plain failure of British journalism that we're not calling people what they are. Nick Robinson, much as I respect him, wrapped that round his neck. I mean, I helped him when he said, well, obviously if they haven't been processed, then we don't know what they are, that you can call them refugees, we can call them migrants. And that's not true, is it? Actually, if 70 to 80% are refugees, then it doesn't matter whether you process them or not. That's what the stats are going to show you when you have. And we just, as usual, Ovand and Window, which we're all now familiar with, bowing to the right's agenda of naming.
And for those who don't maybe understand the difference in these different names, why is that specifically
A.A.
important?
Gill, my great hero, wrote the best piece about the refugee crisis way back in like 2018 or something, or 2015. I teach it every year at Manchester. It's called Welcome to Death Island. It's on the UNHCR website, although it was written for the Sunday Times. And he says it's very simple. Refugees are running from, migrant running to.
Okay.
Asylum seeker is somebody who has an asylum claim in the system. An illegal migrant is everybody, because we've made it impossible for anybody who doesn't come here with a visa. You can't land in Dover legally. That you are then illegal. And I've talked to the lawyer who they had to change the law to defeat, because he said, well, wait a minute, if they haven't crossed the British border, which they can't cross until they get to Dover, then they're not in the country. So how can they be illegal? So actually, aren't they just them until they cross the front line and then we decide what they are? They said, no, they changed the law. But the truth is, they're being called migrants because it's just a simple bully boy tactic. And so those illegal migrants, who are what you hear most talked about when you go to the Welly and Todd, is, well, they're technically, that's true. They are under British law illegal migrants, and they are also refugees, 70% of them. So they then switch from being illegal migrants to asylum seekers, and then they finally get called refugees. And at that point, we let them get jobs, which is why we still have an NHS and why we're going to need more of them if we want to have armed forces to fight Russia. A quick story. That day in the Welly ended really well. I mean, we drank a hell of a lot. It was mid-morning. I got them all going. They got me going. And finally, I was across the table from the one in charge, actually, who was a very smart guy, and I really liked him. And kind of met psychologically in charge. You know, the one who doesn't look at you when you walk in, just carries on playing the fruit machine and hears every word you say. Every word, to yourself or to them. And we got talking, and I liked him tremendously. And I was going, what we need to do is give them all fucking British passports and give them all guns and put them in the trenches to fight Putin. And they were like, yeah! So the quite right and the reform voting right, at least on this very small and vociferous sample, are more than happy to give British passports to asylum seekers if they will also accept guns and Russians.
Okay, yeah.
I mean, it's true. Our armed forces are massively under-resourced, and they need to be if we're not going to have to fight Putin.
Yeah, there's a lot of moral implications, I suppose, in forcing people to do something.
Yeah, I wouldn't force them. I'd say it was an option. Yeah. You know, social care, military, NHS. We've got lots of vacancies, thanks to Mr. Farage and his Brexit, which cost us 23 billion in the first 2 years.
Okay.
I mean, the way we're throwing money away on this crisis is just painful.
And this money, which is used to employ all these people who are taking up the hotels in Dover, for instance, that's all money that's coming from the government, the taxes, ultimately.
Yes.
But the problem will still exist if the money wasn't spent on there. If anything, it would be exacerbated.
Yes, but what we've done again is we've nationalised the losses, which is all the expense of the system, which is running at 5 million a day or whatever, and we have privatised the profits. So if you were to take I put in a Freedom of Information request, actually. Where is my FOI to the Home Office asking about the legal bill? So they're always talking about lefty lawyers for the last 5 years. Lefty lawyers have been the problem, i.e. Care for Calais lawyers, human rights lawyers who've stopped deportations to Rwanda, etc. How much do you think it costs to oppose those lawyers by hiring lawyers if you're the government? Well, I tell you what, nobody bloody knows except the guy who's sitting on my FOI, which he promised to send me back on the end of July. He said because it had security implication, he's given himself another week. And I followed up and everything. He hasn't come back, but I'm sure he will. Probably when he comes back from holiday. I suspect it will be eye-watering. And the actual cost of the asylum system since Theresa May decided to close embassy processing in the 20s for her own political ends is almost incalculable. Now, had we given that money to British local government, like a primary school headmistress who sees a new kid walking down the street and thinks, great, that kid means money for my school, we would see every single refugee and asylum seeker and think, great, that's why I've got a new hospital. But we didn't. We gave it to about 6 people who are donors to the Tory party, who own and run and sharehold Mighty Care and Custody. I mean, I'm not making this up. And I put it to a Labour MP just before we went on TV. And he said, oh yeah, we're going to try and shift the money towards local councils. It's like, if you don't do that now, you will lose the next election. And then what are they going to do? They're going to build camps. Massive camps, which is the reform policy, and then fly people out, which is the reform policy. That won't work. I mean, that will so not work. But it will mean we have camps. Sorry, I ranted.
No, it's good. I just feel,
Sorry, Tom. Let's talk about nicer things.
Let's bring it back, I suppose, to the people on the ground who are working to protect and care for these individuals in their moment of greatest need. Let's talk about the RNLI as a charity, because they got a lot of flack a few years ago.
They still get it.
Yeah, and there was a huge wave of donations that came.
Their best fundraising year ever.
Yeah.
Off one Nigel Farage video clip where he said they were a taxi service for migrants. So this is where it gets interesting. If reform did get in, Farage would come under enormous pressure to stop Border Force and the RNLI rescuing these people. But they would then keep coming anyway. I don't see that really works. The only person who's ever stopped the boats, the 2 countries have done it. Australia did it, but they are in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, so that's a hell of a lot easier. And they did use pushbacks. But a big boat that can cross an ocean is much easier to push back safely than a dinghy. And the other thing is they had offshore islands that they could stick people on. So we haven't got that, so that doesn't work. Priti Patel did hire the Australian who said, let's do pushbacks. That cost a load of money and didn't do anything. The other person who's done it is Georgia Maloney, and she more or less killed the numbers crossing the Med for quite a long time by banning search and rescue and by paying the Libyan and Tunisian coast guards to attack the people on the beaches and in the water, to ram them. There were instances, there's a lot of people who died, and we pay for this, Europe does, and then to take them to rape, torture and organ trafficking camps. And if it sounds black, it is as bad as it gets. Or dump them in the desert. In other words, to inflict horror on the refugees before they get to the water, ideally, but also in the water. That works. So my question for Mr. Farage would be, do you have the guts to do that? And it won't work anyway, because you can make it across the channel in a flimsy boat. They'll need more petrol.
Yeah, I've seen it. Last year I went and got a ferry across to Dunkirk.
Yeah.
And as I was just sitting by the window in the opposite direction, it was
no way,
quite far away, but it was unmistakably the image that I'd seen of a little bit on the news, but I never really appreciated what it was. A very flimsy,
very packed
boat heading in the opposite direction, and it was just so casual and so normal.
So normal.
And I was going in the other direction. And then
amazing.
Cycling out.
What did you feel when you saw it?
There's a lot of emotion actually, because I think I'd never seen it with my own eyes.
I've never seen it. Good for you. What an amazing privilege to see that. I was so moved when I watched them getting onto the coach in Dover. So they said to me, best moment of our lives, British flag on the side of the boat. Second best moment, the sausages. And then I met the guys who cooked the sausages, and then They check them for COVID, check them for everything, check them for fingerprints, blah, 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 and then they stick them on a coach. And I watched them being ushered onto the coach as if they had booked it, just by this nice security guard girl and the coach driver. And I felt it was like watching celebrities. Because as you say, I've been a travel writer, and I have been around the world and up and down it. And I've done some pretty far out journeys, and yet nothing I have done touches what those people had done that morning. Yeah, I did feel it was like meeting celebs. So brave. And some of those journeys take 10 years. I've met those people too.
Yeah, on the Dunkirk side, as I cycled out, I saw along the side of roads where people were basically camping.
Imagine doing that with a baby.
Washing their clothes in a river.
Yeah. Imagine doing that with a baby. And then getting here and being told that you're some kind of problem.
You said that why they like to come to Britain is because they believe that it's not racist.
That's correct. It is much less racist than France, than Italy. Germany has good reports. Romania has incredibly good reports. Like if you talk to the Ukrainians, I hosted a Ukrainian, they said the Romanians as a people were just incredible. They were immaculate. The minute their neighbour, Ukraine, was invaded, apparently Romania just stood up. Wonderful. Yes.
It's an interesting point here. It's about standing up to our neighbours.
Yes, and about not being racist. And Britain, for all of its, and it does have extreme racism in the worst places. I was just talking to a guy this morning over coffee, a fellow customer at a coffee shop up the hill, and he said he was done over in a top bank in the city of London. And because he was the only guy who was black, he said, I knew they were going to hang it on me. I just felt like apologising. But of course racism exists here and it's poisonous. But anti-racism also exists here. And moreover, simple flipping London, British, Welsh, Irish, Scottish decency in that we tend to take people face to face how we find them.
Yeah, there is a lot of good people here.
There are.
And it's important to recognise that.
70 million in my view, minus Nigel Farage.
Before we move on, talk to me about really fundamentally all these volunteers who were helping. Talk about them. What were they like?
I mean, I wish I'd had your camera. One of them, Jessica, was one of the most remarkable people I've ever met. She would go out when I was knackered. We'd been out all day and she was the front line. They talked to her. I would go home to my guest house and she'd go back out into the wastelands. And I said, don't you feel unsafe? She's a very attractive Italian. And she said, no, how dare you? She basically accused me of being a racist. I was like, these are all young men living in bushes who are desperate. And she said, when I hug them, it humanises them. It reminds them what they are. And they said Mandela did that. He would speak to the best version of you that you are automatically. I've come across people like that. Jess was one of them. And I reckon she was costing the British Priti Patel budget millions by herself in Calais looking after people. But if she hadn't been there, they would still have been there. They just would have been angrier and more desperate. She was also saving the French an awful lot of crime. And I've never really met anyone I admired more than that. She was in physical pain. She'd hurt her foot. She had no money. She'd worked on cruise ships to make the money to pay for her own job. Lived in a caravan in Calais. And then her boss, Claire Mosley, there ought to be a statue of Claire in Trafalgar Square. I mean, she is what is great about this country in a box. And lifeboat crews, I was on when I was young and nice. They're just lovely people on the whole. I mean, me accepted. But they really are. And they're so proud of what they do. And until Nigel Farage came along, communities were incredibly proud of them. He's a poisonous little worm masquerading as a clown. He's genuinely dangerous, and he'll do nothing but harm. I do have one question for any viewer who might be considering voting for him. Can you point me to one thing, just one, for one constituent or voter that Mr. Farage has ever done? One positive thing, because as far as I can work out, and I have looked at this, all he's ever done is trouser money for being elected and donations. And that's it. I mean, I'm a journalist. I'm not a campaigner. I'm not here to push some kind of viewpoint. I have very strong views. They don't interfere with my work. They inform my questions. I would give him the fairest hearing he's ever had. But my first question would be where he pays his taxes, because even the Perplexity AI doesn't know that. Rumoured to be in Belgium, Mr. Facade. I don't know if that's true.
Right. Okay. Let me just see where I can take this off the back of that.
Straight to the pub, I should think. I mean, that's why that's why he works, is because he actually can have a beer and a cigarette with you. Jesus. And he can stand up in a public square and make a noise for an hour and a half and look like he enjoys it without notes. It's not the same as an Aaron Bevan standing up in Pontypridd and inventing and Lloyd George the NHS off the cuff, because Mr. Farage doesn't have that sort of talent. But he is able to speak with people and possibly even listen to them, which unfortunately nobody in the current government is, as far as I can work out, except Stephen Kinnock, possibly.
Well, you've written, amongst your kind of career as a writer, of many of your personal experiences. One of them was a profound experience for your own mental health.
Sits up straighter.
What did you see through your experience with refugees within parallels of your own mental health?
Oh, a great question. Well, when you're in real trouble, the only things that can really help you in the end are either money or the system. And I've been in a position of having neither, and also at different times having both. And the refugees are the same. They're essentially completely powerless. And the system does work, both in mental health and for refugees, not as well as it should. And people die because it fails. But we know how the system can work. We know all the bits. We know it for refugees, actually, and we know it for mental health. So it's very frustrating to be in a period where those bits aren't in place in the right order, doing the right things, and access to help is so patchy and loaded towards the rich. But as in both cases, what's the overpowering thing is that Britain, again, is terrific. Wherever they come from, whatever colour they are, whatever they believe, the people who staff a lot of the asylum system and the people who certainly staff the mental health system are some of the best people you'll ever meet. So I'm afraid, as a critical, cynical, I'm not cynical, but as a critical observer of Britain, I can only admire its people. Certainly in mental health and in refugees.
And what does it mean to be British?
Brilliant question. Well, I am at least 1% Indian, 1% Ashkenazi Jew, 24% Belarusian, quite large Manchester Welsh, and quite large Manchester Irish, and also Welsh Irish. I was born in Hammersmith, but you said I grew up in Wales and I live in the northwest. So I think we talked about how flags are, they work as far as rugby fields. After that, they don't mean anything. But what's fascinating is that what they represent, of course, is values. And what does it mean to be British is to subscribe to or to be soaked in or to oppose, but still be surrounded by British values. And what we print that and give it out to kids. It is equality before the law, freedom of speech, whatever the sodding tabloids say. I think probably free press isn't in there, but it means, it's free speech. So it's equality before the law, justice, equality, and what's the other one? It's like decency, basically. He made up. But that's what it is. Essentially, that's what it means to be British. To be lucky. Very, very lucky. And I have been to over 70 countries. So yeah, it's to win the lottery of life. Unless you win the shit end of it.
Being born here is
to become here. To become here, to become British, to be welcomed in, to put yourself into Britishness, into our little island. I mean, I have no patience at all with borders. I don't believe in them. I think they're nonsense. They're historical bollocks and they're anti-economic. We all got richer when we had no friction in our trade. When the EU accession countries joined in 2010, everyone was like, ooh, loads of Romanians are going to come take our jobs. Everyone got richer. That's what the numbers say. The EU is one of the best inventions ever, and its borders should be extended to Vladivostok and Cape Town. And the reason we haven't let Turkey in is like, they don't have a free press. I think that's a really good measure. Are you allowed to tell the truth about people in power or not? So yeah, I do think, despite being anti-border, given that we've got them, I'm really glad that in that constellation of nations and values is the British contribution. And I'm not even a patriot, really. I'm much more kind of world patriot, Although you should see me on match day. I wouldn't piss on the St George's Cross. Only because England-Wales is too important to be enjoyable, as my aunt says. It really is.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about
where do you fare on
the clash of civilizations, we're talking about Scott Gibbs in 1999 in Wembley.
Where do you fare on that match day fixture?
Well, it is a bit too important to be enjoyable. I really don't enjoy watching English people score tries against Welsh people. But luckily, we don't really care if we win or lose, just as long as we play better. And we often do.
That's the Welsh way.
Yeah, not recently, to be fair. But when we do, we do, As Max Boyce said, they've got a mobile roof on the Arms Park. When Wales attack, they'll roll it back, and God can watch us play. I love rugby. I was a flanker.
Right, okay.
Oh my God, it's one of the great games, isn't it?
Still one of the proper gentleman's game in sport where so much of that is lost to gamesmanship and playing against...
There's so much legal and semi-legal violence in rugby that everyone goes home feeling really peaceful.
Yeah. Should that be allowed in all sports? You can take your...
Certainly football needs some help.
Yeah, that's a wild topic to get into.
Yes. Well, when you're my age, you have to think about which sports you can do. Because last time I played rugby, I came back covered in blood from pinner. And my then girlfriend made me promise never to play it again because I was so unfit and useless.
Before we bring things to a close, I wonder if you could help talk a little bit about your craft of how you actually go about creating a form of literature.
Dear man, what kind question. Well, you see, there's this pen.
It is such a unique experience to everyone, and it's probably something that you've had to refine over the years to work out what works for you. And what is that secret recipe that that you can now after?
In my case, actually, it's a lot simpler because I am dyslexic mildly, and I have really, really bad handwriting. So all I could ever do is get it down as fast as possible. And so I've had such a lucky life because a lot of my writing has been in the back of a Land Cruiser trying to write something I will be able to read in 4 hours time or even in 4 months. So it varies a lot, as you can see, but I just love it. It's what I'm good at. I really, really love it.
This is a small journal book you've got here.
So it's not I don't keep journals except in the winter when I really am suicidally depressed. So this is just my notebook. So it's questions for Rob McFarlane when I helped launch his book at the RGS and then at Hay. Is it actually the opposite of a relationship? That was for Amy Liptrot, actually, about the instance. That was a couple of years ago. Then I'm interviewing somebody called Gavin, then Notre Dame. I don't know what the hell that is. Bruegel. But yeah, it's all work, basically. And then I went to Sicily for Condé Nast. And so this is a map of the winds. So if you take a boat out of the great harbour in Syracuse, which, as you know, was the subject of Thucydides' amazing History of the Peloponnesian War, where the Sicilian expedition, or the Athenian expedition, goes to Sicily and gets battered. We sailed out on a very nice little motor cruiser, and I said, right, what do you call the winds? And they are these. From north, going clockwise, Tramontana, Gregale, Levante, Scirocco, Ostro, Libecco, Ponente, and Mistrale. Isn't that wonderful? Yeah, simple as that, really. So my craft is reading, writing, and having something to say, asking questions, and trying to be as honest as possible. The best advice I've ever heard was given by Laura Barton. I think she got it from somewhere else. Don't flinch. If you want to be a writer, if you want to write, don't flinch. And I can look back on the books I've written which I flinched in. They tend not to be as good as the ones I haven't.
Explain what you mean by the flinching in terms of the context of
right. So my second book, Truant, it was supposed to be about a biography of a group of friends who all grew up through the 90s and smoked fuckloads of dope, and what happened to them mentally and physically, romantically, and as people as they grew up through dope. And I bottled it. I flinched because I didn't want to expose them too much to their parents. So I ended up writing about me, which I was less interested in, which meant the book was less interesting, which meant that it sold 7 copies. So that would be flinching. In other words, it's the thing that you think you can't write, the thing that you could never publish. That's probably the point of the book. So my advice when I teach it is write it, and now, oh look, surprise, surprise, you can find a way of publishing it. Because you can actually publish anything if you know the law and you've got good integrity. You can pretty well get away with murder. So that's it for me. And it's a song. That's what my writing is a song. I was born to praise people, and I mean reform voting truck drivers, one of whom I adore. I was born to praise people on this planet, and that's how I do it.
That's a beautiful way to look at the world. And you started opening about the travel writing, and you go into a place unaware of anything, and so you can see it for exactly what it is.
Yes. You start doing your research there.
Yes. And I think I've had my own experiences with my own explorations where I actually tend not to research where I'm going.
Do you?
I want it to tell the story of itself to myself.
See, that's a proper writer.
It's also someone who just lacks the foreplanning to actually do the full research.
Yes.
I mean, there's journeys that you could make where you research so much better that you could have a slightly elevated experience because you know where to go
and what to look at, what you're seeing, what it all means.
Sometimes I probably sail past stuff that I should have seen because I didn't know it was there. There's sometimes the nature of traveling through places is that you don't always see everything unless you are fully prepared. But the extent of which you need to be fully prepared involves a lot of time and research, and sometimes you just need to just go out and just do the journey and know that you will see things. And that's been my experience.
Right.
And obviously I've got a lot of stories that I've been writing in the background for the last couple of years or so that haven't yet got to a form of like literature yet, but they are like, I've dumped my mind onto paper of my experiences. Brilliant. So it's a start.
Yes.
Right.
First draft of history.
Exactly.
The only true draft of history.
I call it the vomit pass, right?
It's the first one.
You just vomit out all the words that are in your mind. And then I'm now in the process of sculpting it into something which hopefully might be, but then that takes a lot of time because you want that to be purposeful and meaningful and know that everything you put in there has a reason.
Indeed.
For that journey.
Killer, no filler.
Yeah, exactly. Kill your darlings. Murder your darlings, was it?
Terence Buck, yeah. That means cross out the sentences that you love most because they're almost certainly overwritten.
Yes. Where was I going with this? But
craft and approach. My writing.
Oh yes. So is the best form of this kind of, let's say, travel literature is not feeling the need to be the expert in where you are, but just giving that perspective of your experience in that moment. And knowing that, yes, you can do a little bit of added research that says, oh, this church that I went to, let me just actually do a little bit of research so I can inform the reader a little bit more.
Yeah.
I don't have to be the expert on that for the sake of this journey.
Yes. Given that the expertise exists, depending what kind of thing you're writing, I mean, if it really is just about your encounters with the world, then research doesn't really matter. But that's quite a present tense occupation. Whereas if you're writing about through time, as well as through the space that you travel, then you do need to do research, and it's a question of when. So, for example, when I went to Madagascar, I basically read the Wikipedia page, landed, but my research started then, and it did not stop for 2 weeks. And it didn't stop when I got home either. And by that time I had it. So you must do it for that kind of writing at some point. And obviously you get formulas. I mean, Rob McFarlane, my great friend and hero, was very frank about it. If you look, he's got a very beautiful method, which is first person travel, history and culture, and then the MacGuffin, which will be like the names of trees or whatever he's writing about, an underland, an overland, a river. And that's marvelous, because as a non-fiction writer, I suspect as a fiction writer too, your basic problem is structural. If you can nail the structure, then the material writes itself. Otherwise you wouldn't be writing it. It's obviously interesting or you weren't going to tell it. So the question then is the relationship between research and structure, and this research will either give you one, or the structure will suggest where the research might lie, you know? So I do both. And people like Condé Nast actually now no longer send a sort of star writer anywhere on God's earth not knowing the first thing about it. They really prefer you to know what you're talking about. So when I did Sicily, you know, I lived in Sicily. I must have been there 15 times, and it's one of my favourite places on earth. I am, in fact, in spirit, Sicilian, Russian, Welsh. So that was just a joy to do. But ideally, you live your research. And I've watched the greatest writers of our time at work. I mean, at work. So I went to Paris. I was a great friend of Anna Gavalda, and Anna is one of the 4 or 5 best-selling writers alive. So it's her, Paulo Coelho, Dan Brown, that other guy. And I've seen a book chart, which number 1 is Anna Gavalda, number 2 is like Paulo Coelho, number 3, Anna Gavalda, different book. And nobody reads her in English, really, but everywhere else, my God, they do. And Anna was making the perfect man, because she was single at the time, so she thought she'd make the perfect man. And he's called Charles, and he's an architect in Paris. His wife is cheating on him, of course. He lives in a really nice house, and he's really good at architecture. But God, would you like to get laid? And she went into a bookshop. She was in the middle of the novel. And she was in there for like an hour and a half at the back in the architecture section. And when I said what, you know, obviously I knew what she was doing. But we were talking about writing, and I said, what's the trick, Anna? There are 2 tricks. If you want to be successful, you write a bestseller, and then you write another one. How do you do that? Oh, it's simple, no. We inform ourselves, and we write a masterpiece.
It's that simple.
Yeah, but it's the work. Anna has read more than anyone. You know, she translated that John Williams book, Stoner, into French just because she wanted to, and it needed to be done. Anna's the real thing. And when you go for a walk with her, this is the real research. This is what you do, I suspect. She doesn't miss anything. We were sitting at a cafe, and there was a pair of builders next to us. I imagine they'd vote Reform, and they probably wrote National Rally. They were really nice and like really into their doing. And I noticed she was just looking. And only in Paris can an incredibly beautiful woman look at 2 builders and they not notice. So we sat there eating bread and jam, whatever the French eat, smoking like hell and drink coffee. And I was like, what's going on, Anna? And then I realised the older one was teaching the younger one to read. And suddenly I was in an Anna Gavalda short story. And I'd been sick then, and I hadn't realised it was happening. That's how it's done.
Yeah. Okay, there's a curiosity of what's going on around you, not just in front of you.
A penetrating facility for keeping on looking before judging. An incredible, almost combative curiosity. What is this place? What is this life? How can we say it?
And who are the people that make
Who the fuck are these guys?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is spending months on board a container ship a suitable place to write?
Yes. Charles Darwin wrote at the end of The Voyage of the Beagle, he said, whatever's happened in your life, basically, if you're a young person, he said a young man, because of the time you need to go to sea. And then he lists about 2 pages of advantages of going to sea. But yeah, you grow up, you see the world, you learn from extraordinary men, your whole life changes, and you get to hear sea stories at sea from sailors, and that is all you need. It's about the passing on of stories. So to finish with, last night we launched in Daunt Books in Marylebone a book called The Gifts of Reading, which is an amazing anthology about the gifts of reading and being read to and all these things. And we realised that it is the giving of the gift of story that changes the story of the life it is given to. And we can all do that, whether we write or not. And I have every sympathy for people who can't write, hate writing, don't read. Some of my best friends one artist particularly is in this position, doesn't stop him being the most interesting man in the room. But story can be passed on anyway. And I suspect that the middle classes and the upper classes mostly mediate through print, and lower down the social grade scale or the whatever it is, prestige scale, and certainly the money scale, people don't. But they instead exchange verbal stories. And as you know, they're much better.
Okay, well, we are near the end of our time. So I very much thank you for your amazing stories and anecdotes and insight into such a uniquely British story that celebrates the greats of the people who make us British. I hope people do check out your book, We Came by the Sea, Stories of a Greater Britain. I love that is the second part of that title. And I wish you the best on Baby Wolf.
Thanks.
The newest newspaper in
the
town.
youngest newspaper on the planet, launching tonight. Yeah, baby-wolf.com. I take journalism from anyone on any subject if it is accurate and comes with an invoice, because then I can pay for it.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, maybe you'll see some.
We'll be at Elvino's tonight, you know.
Well, all the best with that venture.
Thank you.
And I look forward to seeing what stories
I look forward to you writing for us, Tom. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to your audience for putting up with it. It's been a real pleasure.
I'm sure they've found it really delightful. I really do. Thank you. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you want to find out more information about any of the guests, please check out the show notes, where you'll also find links to things mentioned in the conversation. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please take a look through the past recordings. There's so many more incredible stories for you to find. And I can't wait for you to enjoy them. Thank you.